Welcome to South West London Alive. I'm your host Tom Large and this is my co-host Anna Cockroft.
Today we'll be taking you through a roundup of the best stories coming straight out of South West London.
From a heartwarming initiative which aims to enrich the lives of those with Down syndrome, to a menacing reinvention of the longest running British comic, The Beano, at Summerset House.
We then take a look into the life of a rough sleeper in Twickenham and how coronavirus has affected homelessness in London and across the UK. And finally, we chart the recovery of amateur boxing by catching up with Worcester Park fighter Ellis Trowbridge.
First up, to mark World Down Syndrome Month, Lily Jobson spoke to Positive About Down Syndrome maternity coordinator Lucy N. Davies and Park Lane Stables manager Natalie O'Rourke about how the Richmond-based riding school is enabling those with the condition to exercise, learn and interact through horse riding.
This October, people have got together to mark World Down Syndrome Month to show children with Down syndrome are just like anyone else. For World Down Syndrome Month, I spoke with maternity coordinator Lucy N. Davies from the online support group Positive About Down Syndrome, who this month have raised awareness with a 31-day challenge many people have got involved with to show the importance of this month.
We have a series of photos every day that are being published, and the hashtag is to be. It's October, and the BE in October, it's like hashtag I want to be. So we have a whole load of series of photographs. Billy's in there actually. I think you were one of the first ones, and he has a t-shirt that says legend. So he was I want to be a legend, and I think you will be a legend. But there's all sorts of other things like dancers, I want to be a barman, and it's basically just to show that people with Down syndrome are just like any other child, that they've got aspirations, they've got the ability to do what they want to do, like anybody, within the limits of their learning capacity. We want awareness about Down syndrome so people can accept our children, and also to show potential new parents that it's not the scary, bewildering experience that they might be expecting. But in terms of a wider picture, we want people to be aware that there is prejudice against our children, and we want people to be aware that people with Down syndrome deserve the same as everybody else. So currently we are getting involved in a Down syndrome bill, trying to push that through Parliament so that we can have a Down syndrome act, so children with Down syndrome are protected and considered when anything goes through Parliament. There is an Autism Act, so teachers are trained in how to teach children with autism. We have to fight for teacher training for our children, because children with Down syndrome learn in a specific way, and for them to succeed and reach their full potential, the teachers need that training. So within the Down Syndrome Awareness Month and World Down Syndrome Day, we can bring these issues to the fore to show that there is that unfairness against our children, but it is also just to show the world really that our children are just children, and they have their worth and they have their abilities.
An activity in Richmond that is vital to the community is Park Lane Stables. Stables manager Natalie O'Rourke expressed the work they do with Down syndrome children. Natalie has been posting pictures of her son Woody, who has Down syndrome, on social media to share as many pictures and facts for World Down Syndrome Month.
So Park Lane Stables welcomes children and adults actually with Down syndrome and any type of disability, and we're here for them to get involved in whatever way they want to. So that might be riding, carriage driving, or just working on the yard. There's always plenty to do with horses, it never ever stops. And it also gives the parents and the families a little break from their family member with additional needs, so that they can have a bit of time out really. We're very proud member of RDA, which stands for Riding for the Disabled Association. So it's a national organisation, and there's about 400 RDA groups around the country, and we're really proud to be one of those. And what it means is that we're accredited and trained and up to date with our knowledge for welcoming people with disabilities to come riding with us. We're always welcoming to anybody that's got Down syndrome, obviously, and we've just been trying to champion it on social media. So we've just been trying to remind people and get them to ask questions about Down syndrome, because there's so many sort of misconceptions about what Down syndrome is. So we've just been trying to put little facts out there and encouraging people to talk about Woody, because most people that know us on social media would know Woody. So we've asked them to at least tell one person in their life about Woody, in the hope that the word spreads and people will get the message that Down syndrome is not Down, it's just got the wrong name, really.
Now we're joined by Lily. Lily, how do these lessons at Park Lane Stables help those with Down syndrome?
So Park Lane Stables helps physically, developmentally, and in terms of the developmental aspect, it's something called hypotherapy. So hypotherapy is when, if they don't pass the RDA checks, the RDA is Riding for the Disabled Association, which works with loads of horse riding schools around the country. So children with any disability, Down syndrome as well, can do horse riding themselves. They can go on horses, they can do as much as they can, just like any other child would. And if they don't pass the restriction that they have to pass with the RDA to be able to go on the horse, because children with disabilities, there's so many different things that could go wrong on a horse, then the hypotherapy program will help them to improve their balance and stamina on horse.
Why is it important for groups like Park Lane Stables to offer lessons for those with the condition?
I think personally it's nice that any child can do a hobby, but with children with Down syndrome, parents might think they're restricted, they can't do horse riding because they don't have the right developmental ways of doing something, and it just gives them a chance to have the same opportunity as anybody else. It also gives parents a break from any child because it is full on, but then again the parents usually do go to support the child because they like to see them just have fun and they can just interact with other children, which is great.
In your video, you spoke to Lucy-Anne Davies from Positive About Down syndrome. Can you tell us a little bit more about what her group do?
Yeah, so Positive About Down syndrome, they've been a support group for families for over 10 years. The volunteers who work for the group, they have had that first-hand experience themselves because they are parents of children with Down syndrome, so they know the feeling of when there's new and expectant parents, it is normal to feel guilty and they get scared to speak out and say, I'm worried, I feel guilty that I'm asking these questions, should I be asking these questions? And they, as they've experienced that themselves, they know that the new parents will ask the questions and it's just a support group. They can talk to other families and other mums, other dads, and yeah.
How has Lucy-Anne experienced that herself?
So Lucy-Anne has a child, Billy, he's 10 years old. He's done loads in his life already, working, he's been an actor. So her experience with her son, she talks about all of this, the opportunity that children with Down syndrome do have, so she can pass it on to new parents.
You mentioned Lucy-Anne's son Billy. What has he done to increase awareness about Down syndrome?
So like I said, he's done acting, he's been on television adverts, he's got his own agent, and at 10, 11 years old, that's a huge thing. Not a lot of people get to do that in general, and considering a child with Down syndrome who people wouldn't think would get that chance, he can just show other children his confidence and just share it with other people.
In your video, you highlight it's World Down Syndrome Month. Why is this month significant?
So I think months like World Down Syndrome Month is just to celebrate their lives and show that they've got as much as an opportunity as any other child. And it's just shared all around social media. It shares the careers, so if someone's an actor or horse rides, it's just to show that they've got a lot of opportunities in their life.
And what else is being done to celebrate the month?
So it's mostly on social media, but there is buddy walks, they all go walking together, and the horse riding group like Park Lane Stables, they would have a little party together. Some raise money for the support groups to
have maternity coordinators like Lucienne, because she gets paid for these maternity coordinators to go into the hospitals and talk to the nurses, interact, and just with the social media, it's just to get as many shares out as possible, just to get it out to everyone.
Does Positive About Down Syndrome believe there's a stigma surrounding Down syndrome? And have they seen any change since their founding?
So I think when I asked them about 10 years ago, when they started, there was a huge stigma, and there is still a stigma, but they say it's definitely changed because Lucienne, when she was pregnant and found out that her child, that Billy is Down syndrome, she was very frightened, very scared. She was told, do you want to keep the child, do you not? She was told a child with Down syndrome might not live over 50, and she thinks, and the group thinks herself, why are they telling parents when their child's going to live to? Like, in general, you don't know when you're going to live to. And I think a lot of people are worried if they will have a child with Down syndrome, and then they think, do I really want that? So these groups help to reduce that stigma, and now they think it is definitely reduced. And months like World Down Syndrome Month help that.
A huge thank you to Lily for joining us and speaking us through her video. Up next, we escape to Beano Town as the comics heroes Dennis the Menace, Minnie the Minx and Roger the Dodger take over London's iconic Summerset house. Honor spoke to the exhibition's curator Andy Holden and contributing artist Nicola Lane about the Beano's enduring creative legacy.
I'm here at Summerset House to see how the Beano comic and its mavericks Dennis the Menace and Minnie the Minx have taken over in its latest exhibition. Featuring over 100 original comic strips from Beano publisher DC Thompson, juxtaposed with life-sized Beano Town reconstructions and contemporary art, this exhibition is all about breaking the rules of convention. I spoke to curator Andy Holden and contributing artist Nicola Lane about the enduring artistic legacy of Britain's longest-running comic.
I loved the Beano. So, I mean, I was a kid, I would cycle down the shop every week and I had it reserved for me and I would read it and I would copy out the characters. So, so somewhere deep inside me was this love of Beano, but I'd forgotten about. It was like it wasn't a comic I'd thought about as an influence, something that you put down when you're like 12 and move on. And I started to think, well, if it was like important for me, the comic, maybe it was important for other artists and maybe it was a sort of gateway into art and creativity. So I decided that I would try and approach the exhibition, make an exhibition about both the Beano and also its influence on artists and musicians and writers, and and explore its kind of cultural legacy. Working with the Beano archive was difficult because of COVID, so I couldn't be in Dundee, so I had to work with an archivist called David Powell, who's at DC Thompson, and what I would do is I would buy a lot of old copies of the Beano off eBay, and then I would go through them and start to spot things that I was looking for, and then I would ask him do you have the original of this? Does the drawing of this exist? And he would say, no, maybe haven't got that, but we've got something like it. Or I would say, I'm looking for something by this artist. So I'm looking for an early Leo Baxendale, or I'm looking for a particular Ken Reed, Jonah. And he would go off into the archive and try and find things. I'd get these themes gradually emerging from the archive, and then I would work out which artworks would maybe help make those themes even more make them more visible, or make them more nuanced, or add something to that theme, so that the artworks in the archive would kind of not illustrate each other, but complement each other in some way. So I was trying to work out how do we find that kind of rebellious spirit that feels Beano-like, or the type of imagery. And so I started to build up, sort of gradually map that as a sort of sensibility, a kind of that maybe the sensibility already means that you like the Beano. It's not necessarily the Beano creates that sensibility, but maybe it helps bring it to the fore in kids. So the title came about quite late in the process. You're researching it for a while, trying to work out what's your main theme here. How are you going to connect Beano to contemporary art? And it's something about creativity. It's something about doing things differently or like being a kind of character, then it became obvious to me that the connection between art and the Beano was this idea of rules and formulas and breaking them. So in the Beano every week you have to, the kids have to break the rules, but in a different way. They can't do it the same way as they did it last time. And the formula is the same, it has to feel like a Beano strip, but it has to do something new. And I was like, that is kind of like how you have to approach making an artwork. The title was a way of connecting the two and also helped me choose the artist in a really clear way. Art of Breaking the Rules became like the obvious choice as the title.
The idea for drawing this came about when I was contacted by Andy Holden. He had discovered evidence of the comics I'd drawn in the 70s for the International Times, and he thought it'd be interesting to perhaps include a page of one of those. I said to him, Andy, I'd like to combine it with the work, my contemporary work. The characters began, as I said, in the 70s. I saw them as my friends because I was living in Notting Hill, and it was a very different place to what it is now. It was very run down. Taxis wouldn't take you there. You said, take me to Portobello Road. No, I won't. And there was a huge housing crisis. And London was filled with very active squatters. So it was all that going on, and all the characters that were part of that world, I saw them as being very like the Bash Street Kids and Dennis the Menace. So I made them, as Andy identifies, in their 20s and doing all those things, like Minnie became Ginny the Gemmy, who was famous for entering buildings. But as happens, as you age, you actually have to earn a living. And that led eventually to being a wellness workshop coordinator. Dennis is living in a housing association flat in Notting Hill. He never moved. It was the squat. And then, as often happened, it became legal. And Dennis, I have to admit, is not very far away from my husband, who finds technology extremely challenging. And I always have to help him. So I think that Minnie helping Dennis with the Zoom reflects an aspect of my own life. I was brought up all over the world, and I lived in 7 countries before I was 15. And one of the countries was Thailand, and there was a family living next door, and their little boy, who was about 5, same age as me, he had a copy of the Beano. And it was the most, I'd never seen anything like it. I'd only seen American comics, which my brother had. And they were very, very different. They were much more sanitized. This was much rawer and more dangerous in a way. So I associated the Beano with transgression. And that is why I think when the 70s happened, which was full of transgression, the Beano character somehow represented that.
So, Honor joins us from the other sofa now. Honor, what is the significance of holding this exhibition at Summerset House?
So Summerset House prides itself on celebrating progressive art, nurturing creativity. It's also a working arts centre, and it's got this reputation for, nurturing progressive art. And so comics, they've also held comic exhibitions in the past, but comics haven't always been seen as an art form in themselves. So for quite a progressive gallery to host something about comics, it just seemed like the perfect fit.
Do you have to be a fan of the Beano, or even comics in general, to enjoy this exhibition?
No, I think that's one of the best parts of this exhibition, is that there's something for everyone. So if you are a Beano fan, a massive Beano fan, then you can go in and there's over 100 original artworks from the Beano comic archives, DC Thompson. Their archives, they have 100 original artworks, and so you can go over and pawn over all of those, and they're fantastic. But if you're not a Beano fan, there's also over 52 works of contemporary art. Heather Phillipson's Fourth Plinth, there's a copy of that in there that Heather provided. So there's lots of things that people can go feast their eyes on.
You spoke to the curator, Andy Holden. What was his biggest challenge in creating the exhibition?
I think creating something that was good for everyone. So there's a animated catapult game in the middle of the exhibition, and then there's also detailed themes about the British class, society, food, lots of different themes throughout that adults can enjoy and lots of different themes that children can enjoy. Combining that into a cohesive exhibition, I think was his most difficult part in creating it.
And what's a fact about the exhibition that people may not know?
I think one of the most interesting parts of the exhibition, and also the strip that Andy in the video was interviewed in front of, is these new strips that feature all around the exhibition hall in the embankment galleries. And they were created by Andy in conjunction with all the Beano artists and the writers. And they're brand new. They don't feature in the comics themselves, but they're about the exhibition. So whilst you're in the exhibition, looking at all the art and the archives, you're also reading strips about Dennis being there and looking at the exhibition with all its bits. So it's a really nice touch. And not everyone notices it, that Andy's in it himself, but I think it's a really nice touch.
With so many artists contributing to the exhibition, why did you choose to represent Nicola's work?
So Nicola's work really stood out to me when I was researching the exhibition. Not only is it really eye-catching, it's on a very large scale, larger than quite a lot of the exhibits in there, but it also represents the key aspects of the exhibition together. So the exhibition in itself is archives mixed with contemporary art. So it's old and new blended together, which is quite like Nicola's work, because she features parts of the strips that she wrote in the 70s for International Times, as well as her recreation that she did this year for the exhibition, imagining Dennis and Minnie on Zoom in 2020. So it's a mix of the old and the new, and I think it just represents the exhibition really nicely.
And do all the artists who feature in the exhibition have a connection with the Beano in some way?
So that was one of the most interesting parts, speaking with Andy, and he mentions it in the video, that these artists, quite a lot of them may have read the Beano growing up, and so they do have a connection to it, but some of the artists also have no connection to Beano at all. But he specifically chose art. Obviously the archives are from the Beano archives, but the contemporary art itself, he chose them to ensure that they had some sort of connection to the Beano, whether it be that that artist read the Beano religiously growing up and was really affected by it subconsciously, or whether they just use some form of the Beano sensibility in their work. You know, this theme of breaking formulas, breaking the rules, breaking convention. You know, contemporary art is all about that. That's a common theme in both of them. So it's about making sure that this sensibility was carried through each of the works to make a cohesive exhibition in general.
Well, thank you very much for speaking to us about your video.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And back to Twickenham now. A South West Londoner reporter, Oliver Murphy, speaks to Steve, a rough sleeper, about his experience and how the pandemic has intensified the issue of homelessness across the capital.
How can our government not help people like us, like especially me? I haven't drunk in 7 years. I haven't been drunk. I haven't even so much as touched a drink in 7 years. I don't do drugs. I break down quite a lot. People say you're not a man if you cry, but I think you're more of a man. But recently, I find myself keep collapsing and crying because I'm fed up of this life.
No one knows the dangers of the coronavirus pandemic more than Steve. Having slept rough around Twickenham and Richmond on and off for 6 years, he knows what it's like to live in fear. But this year has taken its toll.
It's not nice. You know, you just cry a lot. You know, well, I do anyway. Not because I'm sad, because I'm angry with the situation I'm in, angry with the government. You know, yeah, the way I see it, the government make money so they can help the homeless, the ones that want to be helped. But you think about all this stuff overnight and it just gets to you, you know, and, you know, I've never felt suicidal in my life. And recently, I have done. When you're crying out for help and you're not getting it, it's, you know, it puts you in a position where you give up. You know, you just don't want to, you know, you don't want to be here no more because you don't see the point in it. They put us in hotels, but that didn't last very long. But yeah, like it was no support really. It's just, yeah, they had to get you off the street, but then as soon as the pandemic over, they kicked you straight out again.
Tragically, Steve's ordeal isn't unique. He's one of thousands of rough sleepers who remain trapped on the streets during one of the deadliest public health crises to beset the UK. Between 2020 and 2021, outreach workers counted 11,018 people living on the streets, an increase of 3% compared to the previous figure in 2019. And even with the success of the government's Everyone In scheme, which brought in over 37,000 people from the streets, the deaths of rough sleepers also increased, with 967 deaths recorded in 2020, a rise of 37%. In the run-up to Christmas, the charity Glassdoor is reopening its drop-in services for rough sleepers in Camden. Operating in centres across southwest London and located inside its building, the charity has partnered with Ace of Clubs in providing not only hot meals and medical services, but advice on housing and benefits.
This is where the nurses, this is the casework office, that's the reception, the kitchen. We finished the food, so they're cleaning very well. At the moment this is empty, it's all refurbished to record to reopen this month. We're going to have tables, we're hoping to open it as it used to be before COVID.
But the adaptation to COVID has been tough, as Patricia, a Glassdoor caseworker, tells us.
Everything closed down, so they don't have a place to be safe, to take a shower, to have a meal, to get advice, to get money, to get, and for example, many people spend the day in libraries to be warm, to use Wi-Fi for free, or McDonald's 24/7. We came up with different ideas to keep supporting people in different ways, adapting to COVID. In terms of how many people were coming here, loads of people. But because we were doing takeaway food, I had to adapt how I'm gonna engage with them. Before we used to have some kind of problems, but since COVID is very, very bad. And if you put that all together with the language or with the medical, like mental health issues or other issues some people have all together, and they're not receiving this support, and they keep the doors closed, like, no, we don't help you, or you should go there, and they go around, they lose hope.
This is only half the story. For groups on the front line, COVID-19 presents an unprecedented challenge, and some are beginning to feel the pressure. Recent data from Homeless Link revealed that over half of the 137 member organisations who responded to its survey were concerned about income over the next 2 years. While the numbers of rough sleepers has begun to fall, for campaigners it's the deaths of rough sleepers that reinforces the urgent need for a new approach. But what is the government doing to address the issue? Here's what its housing spokesman, Lord Greenhalgh, said in response to questions during a debate in the House of Lords.
What guarantee can the Minister give that this time, with increased transmissibility and local authorities going broke, that no one will be refused a safe room and a roof?
My Lords, Everyone In was a tremendous programme, and that is why it continues to be in place. And I'd point out to the fact that 33,000 people have been helped and supported to the end of November, and we continue with this programme in place and build on the success that has saved many lives in the course of this pandemic.
In a statement, the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government added,
"We must ensure we build on this progress as we recover from the pandemic and continue our tight-knit work with partners across the sector to offer all rough sleepers a chance to sustain a life off the streets."
For now, Steve is receiving support from a number of organisations, but with winter just around the corner, the struggle continues. Oliver Murphy, South West Londoner.
Now, we've welcomed Oliver into the studio to speak to us about his video. Why did you choose to focus your video on rough sleeping specifically?
Well, thanks for having me in, Tom. I think the reason I chose to focus on rough sleeping is twofold. Firstly, I have my own experience of homelessness, and I can tell you from my own personal perspective that it creates a lot of feelings of hopelessness and helplessness, and that's what I really wanted to convey in the video. We see a lot of rough sleepers in London especially, but across the country. But in London, you see a rough sleeper and you try to put yourself in their shoes, but you frankly can't, because the feeling and knowing that someone is sleeping out, especially in the winter, -1, -2, it just seems unfathomable. And that's before a global pandemic, but when you think that we are currently in the midst of one of the worst public health crises in this country for a generation, I really wanted to convey the essence of despair that these people are having to go through on a nightly basis. You know, these people that are falling through the cracks, that aren't getting the targeted help that they need, that I felt really needed exposing.
So in your video, you spoke to Steve. How does he exemplify the issues facing rough sleepers across South West London and across the capital?
Well, like so many that we see across the capital, I saw Steve rough sleeping in Twickenham Park. He, as you see in the video, was in a makeshift tent, surrounded by heroin needles, surrounded by litter. And he is really just a testament of the crisis that we're currently in. Rough sleeping was an issue, as I said, before the pandemic, but now we're in this health crisis, and the NHS has been put under strain, as have so many other services such as mental health. Local authority budgets are, being squeezed. Steve really exemplifies that rough sleepers are not being given the attention that they should be. As we saw in the video, Steve was able to be brought into temporary accommodation under something called the Everyone In scheme, which I'll come on to explain to in a minute. But as he said, he was let out of that hotel, and there you see the kind of the cycle of homelessness start to reignite. The idea that he was brought into temporary accommodation, he wasn't necessarily given that support, that ladder to get on to more stable accommodation, and there he is again in Twickenham, rough sleeping, not being given the support that he needed. He gave me some very harrowing accounts of how he came to end up on the street, and when I was listening to his testimony, I thought, this person is not getting the help that they need. And how is that achieved when you've got a health crisis that is putting so much pressure on services that are so stretched to begin with? So that was the reason why I spoke to Steve. It's the reason why I feel that his story particularly encapsulated the wider issue of the pandemic and what more the government needs to be doing.
Why is rough sleeping such a contentious issue, even more so before the pandemic began?
I think the fact that rough sleeping exists in a fact of itself in the 26th richest country on the globe is one of the main reasons why it's so contentious. We should not be see, people rough sleeping in such a wealthy nation, being forced to put down cardboard just to sleep every night. The fact that people don't have a roof over their head is, a lot of campaigners argue, just frankly ridiculous. The government, a lot of campaigners said to me in the video and outside of the video, the government has the capability to end rough sleeping, and that is what they're trying to do by 2024. But it's such a contentious issue, as the pandemic has highlighted, because the services that are there to protect people have failed. We've seen so many people be failed by mental health services. Those with complex social needs are not getting the help that they need. They're not getting the fast-tracked and tailored support that they should be. And, as they inevitably would done had government put the correct level of funding in. So that's why, for me, and I think for so many people who will watch it, it's such a contentious issue.
So, in the video, you mentioned that during the pandemic there was a surge in rough sleepers. What is the government doing in response to this?
So, in fairness, the government is doing a lot, and as it's been forced to, because campaigners and charities alike have been ramping up the pressure. So, the government introduced last year the Everyone In scheme, which was an overwhelming success. It brought in 37,000 rough sleepers. But even there, just as a side note, it kind of emphasised the fact that the government had underestimated the scale of rough sleeping. That number was 3 times over the official estimates that the government had for people who are homeless and rough sleeping. So there you have your first problem. But they introduced that scheme, it brought so many people in, gave them temporary accommodation, albeit not permanent, but it gave them somewhere to stay, it gave them somewhere to avoid contracting COVID. They've also spent just over 700 billion pounds on services for rough sleepers, whether that be funneling that into local authorities' abilities to tackle homelessness, or schemes such as expanding the Everyone In scheme. As you saw in the video, the Minister for Housing in the House of Lords said that they'll be continuing the Everyone In scheme in a skeleton form to ensure that the government can keep up with demand for those who have been affected by the pandemic.
Charities are kind of facing the front line for this. What sort of difficulties they've faced?
Well, as you saw in that video with Patricia from Glassdoor, I think one of the main issues that charities have faced, and this is a combination because of the pandemic and because of the lack of funding that they're receiving, the main issue is demand. Patricia said that they received over 200 requests for food, one single charity in Camden, operating in Camden. That's a massive surge in demand. rough sleeping already an issue, and charities faced a very, very big pressure on demand. But when you've got a global pandemic that is forcing rough sleepers to try and take any measure necessary to avoid contracting the virus, it puts charities under an added amount of pressure. So charities were really seeing that they were having to deal with a massive spike in the number of people that were coming to them for support, and then charities were obviously unable to operate in the normal context of face-to-face meetings, caseworkers being able to assess clients and to determine what's best for them, because of course many were closed. A number of night shelters across London were forced to close, and then you saw rough sleepers having to take to the streets and not getting the help that they needed. So for charities it's been incredibly difficult, and it's why they're so persistent in calling for real permanent implementations of policy from the government, so that we can not only deal with the consequences of the pandemic on those who have been sleeping rough, but also so that we can tackle the issue in a later date and post-pandemic.
So in your video you shared some shocking statistics, not only about the spike in the number of rough sleepers, but also in the spike of deaths of rough sleepers in 2020. Was this largely a result of the pandemic, or were there other factors?
So something that's really important to distinguish between is the fact that those deaths, 967, that was an increase of 37% compared to 2019. Now, those deaths were not directly caused by COVID-19. Those rough sleepers didn't contract COVID and die from it. Only 3% did, which is tragic in itself, and an example of the fact that because rough sleepers are exposed, left outside and vulnerable, that they are able to contract the virus. But unsurprisingly, around 15% of those deaths were caused by either suicide, and then I believe 25% were caused by alcohol and drug abuse. And the reason for that really is to highlight the current system that's in place for supporting rough sleepers and those who are homeless. The main tool, I guess you could say, for rough sleepers who approach a local authority as homeless and need to be given emergency accommodation is a hostel. Now, while arguably better than being outside, a hostel is not the right environment for someone that is sleeping rough, namely because, if you think about it, it's just a room. Hostels don't have designated support workers inside, largely. Some do, but in the majority they don't. Unlike a night shelter, which will usually have a support worker, maybe even a mental health worker, where a rough sleeper can be assessed, and then it can be determined what steps need to be taken for them to be supported on a long-term basis. Hostels don't have that, and actually, a lot of people mentioned in those rough sleeper statistics, those who died, actually died in hostels, where they were allowed to stay for up to a night or a week or two, weren't getting that targeted support, were still taking drugs, were still drinking alcohol, or decided to take their own life in those hostels.
Thank you very much for your time, Oliver. And finally, Tom moves over to chart the return of amateur boxing through the lens of Ellis Trowbridge, a boxer based in Worcester Park, ahead of one of Britain's most prestigious grassroots competitions, the ABAs.
With amateur boxing returning after COVID, I caught up with Ellis Trowbridge, a boxer from South West London, to discuss what it means to be back, the difficulties he faced whilst out, and how he is now looking to the ABAs, England's most prestigious amateur boxing competition.
Honestly, having boxing back, it's amazing. The ring is my home away from home. It's a place where I get to express myself, and it's just great to be back. People have definitely dropped out during the COVID period, and it's shown really. The ones who were disciplined and stayed loyal to the game, they're still boxing and they're still carrying on once, obviously now COVID's passed. But the ones that were maybe not so disciplined, they've dropped out or maybe just lost themselves, which is a real shame. But definitely returning after COVID, there's been way more interest in boxing. Lots of people picking it up, trying it as a new thing, but not just competitively. On the leisure side of things, so just doing it for fitness, boxercise things. So definitely after COVID, there's been a big interest in boxing, and it's just great for the sport really. Loads more eyes, not just in amateur boxing, but in professional boxing as well. So, boxing's just on the up really. Coming back to the sport, there's been some massive changes. The level of competition has actually gone up. Some would have thought it would have gone down because some people have dropped up, but it's actually gone up because people are more motivated to win now. Everyone wants to win. Where we've had that long break, everyone wants to come back, want to win titles, want to be number one, want to get the first England call up, want to get onto Team GB. So everyone's hungry. There's no one out there that wants to be second. Everyone wants to be number one. So everyone's fighting for that spot, and there is only one spot. So there's been plenty of changes within the boxers, And with the coaches as well, I think it's actually, you know, inspired the coaches to carry on and maybe try different things for their boxers and try new things. So it's giving everyone an opportunity, it's giving everyone a different look at things. And I just think it's just going to progress the sport even more. When COVID hit the amateur boxing scene, it was really tough for us boxers. So I had to keep myself disciplined and motivated during the whole period. So what that consisted of was lots of running, lots of circuit training, and just trying different things. COVID definitely gave me an opportunity to try different things. And what I mean by that is trying different workouts, trying different exercises. And it gave me a chance to learn new skills, and it's allowed me to take that into the ring now with me. Returning to boxing, I mean, there's been loads of difficulties. One main difficulty being the pressure that comes with it. I've not had to deal with the pressure for a while, so just adjusting to that, having the crowd back, having people watching me again, it makes a big difference, but it also improves my game. That adrenaline, it picks up the level of play, so, you know, I take it in my stride and I enjoy it. I think lots of people have enjoyed being back to competitive boxing, because for us amateur boxers, it was a real tough time, not really knowing where the sport was going, nothing to prepare for, nothing scheduled in. So now that we're back in the game and we've got routine again, it's just great, really. Everyone's made their targets, everyone's got their goals, so we've really got things to work towards now. For my own career, obviously I've just been to Jersey. That was an amazing trip, you know, being able to travel and box in my opponent's backyard was just an amazing experience. I'm now aiming towards the ABAs, so I've got about 4 to 5 weeks to prepare for that. So I'm really looking forward to that. And it's just that having that time management, being able to say, I'm going to be boxing in 4 or 5 weeks, you know, having a clear vision, knowing where I'm going, which wasn't possible during COVID. Keeping the motivation was extremely important. Like I said earlier, just trying new things. And I had to just keep on telling myself that, you know, it's going to be back, it's going to be back. Just keep on putting in those hard hours, putting in all those hard training sessions, and it's just going to pay off. So what I done during COVID was I had a little diary and I was writing in everything that I'd done every day, just to try and keep a little bit of sanity, you know, just so I can still tick things off the checkpoints and just keep my head clear and keep on going. And it's really good, it's paying off now, Originally I started up the Lions Den for myself, and then it comes to my attention that lots of people were interested in trying boxercise and trying something new. And I love boxing, and I wanted to inspire the next generation, and I wanted to inspire others, not people that are just younger than me, but older people as well, to try something new, to work as hard as they can, to stay disciplined, to stay motivated. And it really took off from there. So obviously we're in the Lions Den now. I run my own fitness classes under Royalty Fitness. And it's just given me a new breath of life, and it's amazing to inspire the next generation and help people out.
Thank you for moving over, Tom. Could you talk us through how amateur boxing is recovering from almost a year and a half out throughout the pandemic?
Of course, there was a lot of competitions that were missed in the last 18 months with lockdowns and social distancing rules. So the plan now is just to get all those competitions back out and making sure those boxers who work so hard for their opportunity and their chance to take those chances. People will put all their life into this and waiting for that one shot to give themselves a chance to get onto that bigger stage. And allowing them that chance, I think, is the biggest way to keep people engaged and involved within the sport. So yeah, just getting those competitions back running, getting the boxers back out in the ring, and just building that awareness once again.
What was the best aspect for returning boxers?
Just having that something in the diary again. They've got something to focus towards. Training with no end goal is really hard to motivate yourself, because there is nothing to train for essentially. Just keeping yourself physically fit, keeping yourself mentally fit, and making sure that you're in the best position possible for when those fights come back and those competitions do come back, and allowing yourself to make the most of that opportunity that you're given, because opportunities don't often come once or twice, especially at a younger age when boxing. And when you get to that senior stage, you have to take those chances when they come.
So what was the biggest impact on boxing from the pandemic?
I think that the participation numbers dropping, when there was no access to it, people can easily fall out of that habit and that routine. Once you go a week without it, I think you don't realise you don't depend on it as much as you think, and just keeping those numbers were the most important thing. And now people have dropped out. I mean, there's a flip side to it. Those boxers that are still there are very skilled and have put their motivation and can now go through another 18 months without sport again, because they know what the benefits will be when they come back.
So you mentioned that a lot of people dropped out during the pandemic. What does Ellis think can be done to encourage more people to take up the sport?
I was having a chat with him off camera about this, and he said it was just getting people back involved and understanding the love of the sport, because you don't need to go into a ring and kind of fight out for 12 rounds with someone. You can go to a gym and do a boxer-size class, you can shadow box, you don't even need gloves. You can just do it to try and work on your kind of mental strength and on keeping yourself in working at a cardiac aspect of it, because it is a really, really fun way to lose weight and exercise. And to get boxers back in, I think something like Formula One have done a Drive to Survive series, and that has seen the viewership rise throughout the world. I think America has really taken a hit to Formula One, and they've seen their viewer numbers go up. So if boxers could do a behind-the-scenes kind of aspect of maybe a big fight or a big competition, I think that would really, really raise the eyes on the sport, which is how something continues, is you have to have people looking at it and have to have people participating in it.
What was the most important lesson that you learned from speaking to Ellis?
I don't think I understood how hard it is to be at the top of your game, seeing how well he knows his own body in terms of what weight he's got to be, because it comes down to a kilogram or so, especially when you're at that kind of, he's quite a small boxer, so his frame is pure muscle, and he's got to try and make sure he's fighting at the level and weight that's required. And also the time and effort you take out of your day, out of your routine, to work on yourself, make sure you're in the best physical capacity, and finding ways to make your training fun, because at the end of the day it's the same thing again and again. He's got many different routines he can go through, and he takes a lot of enjoyment from that, especially by running his Instagram account and trying to get people involved that way. But I think just the pure sheer determination it takes and motivation in yourself to get yourself into that position.
So boxing isn't really, a major sport in the UK, and it's not taught in schools and things. So what would you recommend to people that want to get involved in the sport? Where should they go?
I'd recommend them just try it, even if it's just in the mirror at home or going down to a gym and speaking to a local PT. They'll love to kind of chat to you and get you involved, really, because it is a great fun way to exercise, and it's something that, whilst it's not as big in this country, a lot of other countries do take pride in it. And I think countries like Thailand, I remember I spoke to a Thai boxer, and he was saying how big it is out there. And it's not as big as some sports, but the viewership and eyes on it is a lot larger than it is here. And just making sure people try it, because at the end of the day, if you don't know if you don't like something, if you don't try it.
So Ellis, you mentioned he's preparing for his competition, the ABAs. Could you explain this further and maybe explain how he trains for it?
The ABAs is the most prestigious amateur boxing competition at senior level, so not age group, but it can be any adult, and it goes down on a regional basis, so they'll fight within their regions. The winners of that then go to the pre-quarters, and then the quarters, and then the semis, and then the finals. The finals, the winner of that is how they're ranked, so kind of your semi-final will be your top 4 boxers in the country, and it will work its way down from there. So the ABAs is the way they're ranked, and the way that they kind of get their understanding of where they are, and it will push on to Team GB and the England squad and that kind of things like that. He's been training religiously every day. He is putting in extra hours, making sure he's at the right weight, eating the right food, and making sure his strength is in the right areas. Because when you're at a low weight, you have to make sure that you've got no excess weight on your body when boxing.
Well, good luck, Tim, and thank you very much for speaking with us. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to South West London Live. I've been your host, Honor Cockroft.
And I've been your co-host, Tom Large. Head over to our website, swlondoner.co.uk, for more of the latest news, or check out our social channels.